My name is Pearl Pillay, and I am from Johannesburg, South Africa, and I work for an organization called Youth Lab. Youth Lab is a youth policy think tank, and we work with mainstreaming youth participation in policy issues and in community development. So politically, right now, things are a bit confusing. We've got the ANC, which is the ruling party, going into elections in 2 years. And we're currently, I think for the first time in a long time, faced with lots of political uncertainty, where there are big issues around, particularly corruption surrounding the president, and no real accountability. So even though we have court rulings that have showed that he's violated his oath of office and violated the constitution, there hasn't really been much consequence for him. And as such, lots of people are losing faith in the ANC. Opposition parties are getting very strong. So in the last, I would say 2 years maybe, we've had 8 motions of no confidence against him in Parliament. He's won all of them, but it shows, so the most recent one a couple of weeks ago was actually the closest it's ever been. And I think it shows a rising opposition towards the ANC, but people that might not even support the opposition but are just so frustrated the ANC is not holding this man accountable and is willing to sacrifice their seat in government to protect him, is putting all of us in a very weird sort of position. So we also have young people that are more and more losing their faith in political systems. So young people are quite socially conscious, and I think there's a growing sense of consciousness amongst young people in South Africa. If you think about things like fees must fall and roads must fall, people are becoming more in tune with the political climate and why things are the way they are, but are not necessarily joining political parties and entering the political sphere in that way. And so it becomes difficult when you then think about elections, because there are lots of people that are saying, well, I'm actually not going to even vote come 2019 because I don't have options. So we're in a bit of a tough spot right now. But I think it's a space where we can really carve out an identity post-liberation party and post-liberation politics, which is good. I think it's tricky because on the one hand you want to say yes. I do think that there is still some hope. I think this election particularly is a lesson in accountability, because whether the ANC loses or not, I do think that they're still going to lose a considerable amount of votes. And hopefully that's a wake-up call to liberation movements and to ruling parties that might have gotten complacent, and we see that across the continent, to actually see that the more educated and the more awake your people become, the more responsive they are to the times when you mess up, and the more they'll hold you accountable. On the other hand, I think that there's also a lot of pressure on countries like South Africa and Nigeria as sort of being people or countries that other countries should look up to. And I think it's difficult because we all have such different contexts. Lots of countries finished colonized or got independence from colonization and then had civil wars. We didn't have that, but then we had apartheid, And so our historical contexts that shape our current context are so different, and sort of looking to other countries as some sort of role models, I guess, is difficult because these are not things that you can replicate in other spaces. But at the same time, I hope that we are able to improve our accountability in government and be able to show other countries that it's possible for a liberation party to go wrong, and to either self-correct or be kicked out of power. Again, I think for one, it might be a bit exaggerated. We'll always say that our sort of freedom to criticize has not really been stepped on. So we can say whatever we want, basically, about the president and the ruling party and all of that. And we don't have to be afraid that if you protest or if you say something that you're going to disappear. But on the other hand, especially within the ruling party, in a lot of provinces that are strongholds for the ANC, like KwaZulu-Natal, you find lots of factional battles, but also lots of real oppositional threats to the ruling party's power. And so what tends to happen in those sort of mini battles, I would say, is there has been a lot of violence. There's been officials held hostage and kidnapped. There've been people that obviously have been murdered. And more recently, we've now seen that has escalated from being factional battles to actually translating in bigger spaces. So if you know recently or since the kind of accountability launch against the president, lots of ANC MPs have spoken out against him, and have lost their jobs or have been really threatened. So a prime example is an MP named Makhosi Khoza, and she has been very vocal against the president and against what the party is doing and not doing to protect this man. And she has received death threats. Her children have received death threats. They've been followed. Things are really intense for them as a family. And so it is kind of spilling out, and I think it's symptomatic of what happens when people really want to hold on to power, that they're willing to do it at all costs. And it's a scary time because in our democracy, we've not really experienced that, where people within a party are the ones that are afraid to speak out. Usually it's opposition, it's people from the outside. But I think that's another call for the ANC to just self-reflect and realize that if people that are loyal to your party, so people like Makhosi Khoza have not left the ANC, they've not resigned as MPs, so they still believe that it's the party for the country, and they're just saying, well, wake up and do better. And if they're being threatened, then what does that say for you as a party? I mean, it's awful. It's really saddening. So with the xenophobia, it's most important to note that it's happening against other black people, and so it's not Americans being attacked, right? But a lot of it is also, I think, calls to be understood as well. And a lot of these communities where these things happen, people are really poor and they're unemployed and they're frustrated, and they expect that you have a government that's going to provide opportunities for employment, and it's not happening. And so when they see people from other countries that are there that have businesses and seem to be flourishing, their immediate anger gets channeled that way, because they feel like it should have been the government that's actually providing this for us, and they're not, yet other people can come here and start businesses and their families can flourish, and we're still left behind. And so when you're unable to channel your anger towards government, who should be where your anger goes, then it spills over to people from other countries. And it's really sad and it's really unfortunate, but it does highlight the plight of people, especially in South Africa. And then on the flip side, it's not like people from other countries go into South Africa because it's fun. People come there because they're supposed to be in search for a better life, or they saw better opportunities, and that should be something we should be proud of, that we can actually have people that want to come and build lives in South Africa because it's a space for opportunity. And so where we should actually be building there, instead of supporting big American and European corporates, we should be building these people instead of fighting them or working with them. But I think it's a lot of misplaced anger, and we're a very psychologically damaged country. We've had a lot of traumatic experiences, and I'm glad you mentioned racism as well. South Africa is an extremely racist country, and it's funny because the racism is perpetuated by an actual minority who are still brave enough to flaunt their racism, and we've not been able to heal from that, because even now we still experience the trauma of things like apartheid. And so when you haven't dealt with all of those other issues, they then tend to spill out in other channels, and we seem to be not able to do anything about it. I think it's moderate. I don't think it's great. If we talk about specifically political parties, so the big political parties like the ANC and the DA, which is the main opposition party, have very large youth movements, people that are very loyal to the party, and are very active in campaigning and in political activity. Outside of that, it's not great. Young people in South Africa struggle, especially if you want to be politically active, to be able to do that outside of the party space. And so if you're interested in politics, but you can't find space in the ANC and the DA, where do you go? And so that's a battle that we have. So the youth that are politically aligned, there's a lot of them, and they're very active, but there's a very big gap for people that don't want to fall into mainstream politics, because they don't really know how they can participate. Thank you for having me.